Welcome to the Empowered Flow podcast. I'm Tris Alexandra, holistic clinical nutritionist, women's health and menstrual cycle educator, and mama. Join me and experts in nutrition, fitness, mindset, and holistic healing as we explore conversations to open your mind to a different way of thinking on all things women's health, hormones, periods, cyclical living, and fertility. Whether you're seeking knowledge, inspiration, or a supportive community, you've found your tribe. Let's dive in. Today, I'm chatting to Ange all about strength training for women and optimal exercise during pregnancy. Ange Drake is the founder and head coach at women's boutique strength training studio 23W, located in Preston, Melbourne's north. Ange is a highly skilled fitness professional with experience and qualifications in pre- and postnatal exercise, nutrition, level 1 strength and conditioning, level 1 powerlifting, mat Pilates, boxing, and more. The strategies and systems taught at 23W mirrors Ange's philosophy in health and fitness. And I love her philosophies of learn to be 1% better every day. Ange, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to see you again.
So lovely to be on, Tris. Thank you so much for having me here.
Now, I've known you for a little while, but I want you to share for listeners, tell me a little bit about your story and who you are. And also, I really want to hear about what led you to opening 23W Gym.
So my name is Ange Drake, and I'm the owner of one of Melbourne's leading female-only strength and conditioning communities. We're based in the northern suburbs up here in Preston. It's called 23W. And at the moment, we work with around 250 members. And that's a combination of group members and also personal training clients. And a big market we work with is women in that postpartum space, but also general fitness. And we're starting to work a lot more with women who are approaching 60s and beyond as well. So it's a really exciting place to work. We do have our niche being women, but in terms of what led me to opening up 23W, so we've been open for 5 years now. I started out my career as a PE teacher, but prior to that, as a teenager growing up, I've always been really passionate about human movement, played all the sports. I grew up in country Victoria, which was a fairly isolated upbringing. But when I think back to it, I was like going for runs and doing, Windsor Pilates in front of the TV. As soon as my mum got those DVDs, I just loved anything that really involved the idea of getting the body stronger. And I studied it obviously at university. I became a PE teacher and I did that for about 7-8 years. And I loved every single part of it. I loved educating adolescents, but there was basically, as soon as I started out as a teacher, I realized that I really wanted to learn how to train myself in the gym. And despite the fact that I'd spent a lot of time learning about human movement, I really hadn't actually been much of like a typical gym goer. And I spent a little bit of time living in London, and going to the gym was a big thing in such a big city. So coming back to Melbourne, I was like, okay, I really want to learn how to train myself. So I'm going to enroll myself into a personal training course. And I thought, you know what, if I can get just a couple of clients on the side that helps pay for the course, that bit of professional development that I just did, and it's going to have great crossover and into my work as a senior PE teacher, this is going to only benefit my knowledge base. And as soon as I started training clients, I fell in love with it even more. I started off with a handful of clients, training them after I'd finished the day of teaching. And then before I knew it, I was kind of giving up on my own weekend sport and training to take on more clients. So there was a period of maybe 3 to 4 years where I was working a full-time job as well as PTing people in the morning and at night and on weekends. And there's only a certain period of time that you can kind of keep up that pace. And it was a slow realization when I worked out that I just wasn't that passionate about teaching in a traditional school setting anymore, and that my journey had really started to take off in working in the fitness industry. So by then I'd started a website. I'd really started to develop a brand and really niche down on, we're working with women specifically, and it was kind of like a hop, step and a jump really to go, okay, I'm going to take a bit of time off teaching. I'm going to see if I really do like coaching full time, which of course I did. It was amazing. Working early mornings, working late nights, and then having a bit of time off during the day. I was like, this is ideal. Lots of time to train myself as well. I looked for a space. I found our current studio location. I got a lease knowing nothing about what it actually meant to get a commercial lease or run a business. And I've kind of been learning ever since. So that really is kind of, I guess, how I started. I started with just a passion, and that passion grew into a side hustle, and that side hustle turned into something that just gave me so much joy and reward. And yeah, I've been growing and learning with the community as our 23W community's also been growing.
Love that. Such a empowering and inspiring story. And I love that you now get to go on and empower other women through the gym and through your approach with training. Something that I wanted to share as well with your gym, because I used to live in the area. I wish I still did, because I absolutely love going to 23W, and it helped me through that postpartum period. Especially, I just had my son join the gym, and what was so helpful was not only your knowledge in postpartum and getting back into training and strength training, but also you have a little kids area and a nanny, a shared care nanny, which is so great. So I used to take my son along, and yeah, he loved it. So it was really good. So I'm really excited to have this conversation about training for females and strength training. And I'd love you to start with sharing some of the differences in how women should approach exercise, maybe compared to men. So just thinking about like our physiology, our hormones, our metabolism, and the differences there.
Yep. I love this question because, like, at the heart of it, like, should men and women really actually train differently? The answer is kind of no. But having said that, there's some really big clauses in there. Because while the principles and methodologies of actually getting the body stronger are essentially the same, when you unpack our hormonal profile and what helps us to get stronger, we have a hormone estrogen, which a lot of people have heard about, but it's actually a specific form of estrogen, E2 or estradiol, which is kind of like our female testosterone. And females do have testosterone. It's in very small quantities, but what the role it plays in our body is completely different. Well, not completely different. It is not our anabolic hormone. Estradiol is our anabolic hormone. So knowing that what drives us to get stronger is the hormone that's closely linked to our cycle, we need to understand that there are going to be some fairly significant differences in the way in which we are building our bodies, knowing that we are working on either like a 28-day cycle or a 30-day cycle, or whatever your cycle actually is, if you are a cycling woman who is getting their period. But also then you kind of unpack, well, in that there are also nuances that you are talking about women across a lifespan. And unlike men who are just, they become men and that's their journey. They're kind of working just on this constant 24-hour clock. Women are working on their 28-day cycle or their 28 days if they're cycling. Then you've got possibly a period of their lifespan where they might be spending time pregnant, and you're seeing a completely different hormonal profile there, and massive changes in body in alignment, in just musculature, how the body's moving. And then you're talking about, say, a woman who's going through perimenopause and menopause, where you're seeing a change in those hormones yet again. So I think understanding those factors, it is really important to keep in mind that estrogen plays a really significant role in muscle mass, in bone health, in bone density, in cognition. And we need to be training and fueling our body and being aware of lifestyle factors in a way that keeps our rhythm, our cycle in mind, because our cycle and our hormonal fluctuations play a significant role in how our body metabolizes fuel at different points of the month, how our body responds to stress, our ability to recover from the work we're actually doing in the gym. So I think zooming out as a woman, it's really important to go, okay, well, what do I need to take me through the next lifespan? What sort of things do I need to be thinking about including into my training? If you're in your 20s, early 20s, 30s might look very different to say if you are getting ready to fall pregnant, if you're actually pregnant, if you're returning back from postpartum from having a baby. So I do think there needs to be a really strong awareness of what your goals might be at every single lifespan. And I guess going back to, I think you asked specifically about, like physiology and metabolism and what is the end game? Like for women and for all people, not just women, but women specifically, our greatest asset is our muscle. And our muscle mass and strength is one thing that we need to be keeping in mind throughout our 30s, 40s, and 50s, because we know that when we go through menopause, we see a drop in muscle mass. And that drop in muscle mass could be to a tune of like 3% after, like in your 30s, and then strength really starts to nosedive when you're going through perimenopause and menopause itself. So keeping all that in mind, you need to learn training techniques that are going to best support your physiology to promote muscle mass, to promote strength, and knowing that, like, at the heart of it, our bones are only as strong as the muscles that are actually acting on them. And that's really the end game. We want to be also making sure that we're promoting bone density, that we need to learn to train in a way that best supports and stimulates muscle mass, strength, and bone density. And that's actually learning how to lift weights heavy. And, a lot of people, when you say lifting weights could be lifting 3-kilo dumbbells in a Pilates class, but lifting heavy, we are talking about learning to lift in a 6-rep or less range, because we want to be able to, from a physiological perspective, stimulate the body in the best way, in the most optimal way possible, to develop a really strong muscle contraction. And I'm not going to go into the science of what's actually happening between the filaments, actin and myosin, but lifting weights is the best way. Heavy weights is the best way to stimulate that. And as you get older, it becomes the prime way that we are going to get stronger. But learning to lift weights with a barbell is not something that you can just pick up overnight. It takes years of practice. It takes confidence. And it's part skill, it's part technique, it's also part strength of actually having all of your ligaments and tendons, all the small muscles being strong enough to be able to support that kind of work. So it's one of those things that I would highly recommend that for women, you ensure that you actually phase that into your training at some point, because as I said, when you're going through perimenopause and menopause, it is the best way to be looking after your muscle mass and your bone density, as well as some other types of training. But, lifting heavy weights really is kind of, it really is kind of where it's at.
Yeah. For sure. I love how you've broken that down into understanding that, yes, essentially we're training similar to men, but with the understanding of how our hormones are different throughout our 28-day or, throughout our menstrual cycle, or our infradian rhythm, as I sometimes refer to it, but also through each life phase, because that's a really important thing to understand as well, because our goals shift and change throughout life depending on where we're at, whether it's, whether we're in our cycling years or pregnancy or postpartum, or then going into perimenopause and menopause. And each of those, there might be some shifts and changes in the way that we're training. And then I was going to ask you about the importance of strength training for women, which you touched on as well, because I think we, can have these misconceptions or think that strength training is really, it's just about building bulky muscle. And yes, it is about building muscle, but I think there can be some misconceptions, particularly with women around that. And they think that, or they worry that maybe, or they think that maybe we don't need to be lifting heavy weights, or, if they're just doing, some sort of resistance training, it might be enough. But I love that you've sort of touched on the importance of strength training and what that is, in the sense of like lifting heavy weights and aiming for those, the lower end of the rep range, so that you're really building like actual strength and building muscle, and then how that then carries us throughout life for bone density and metabolism and injury prevention and all of those things. So, that was just a really
I
sort
didn't
of,
really speak much about like actual cycle and I guess training in around the cycle.
yeah.
Want me to elaborate there?
If you want to, yeah, absolutely, please do.
I
Yeah.
know that a lot of your listeners are probably pretty tuned into how our cycle works.
Mm,
And a common question I get is like, do I specifically train in and around my cycle to
yep.
optimize performance? I definitely pay attention to where I'm at in my cycle and knowing certain hard facts in that during the follicular phase, which is between when you bleed to ovulation, it's kind of like our low hormonal phase, but we see an increase in estrogen. And that's generally when I feel I am able to train at higher intensities. It's also generally when like my body from a metabolic standpoint works really well with glucose. It's very
Mm,
able to pull glucose into the cell. So that makes me train harder, more powerful. I'm more likely to be hitting PBs because of the increase in estrogen during that time. It's adding in that anabolic effect that I can then recover from. Usually around ovulation, I might see a small drop in my energy. I usually have a couple of nights where I'm quite sleepy, and sometimes I might drop my intensity slightly if I'm feeling a little uncomfortable.
mhm.
I do notice a little bit of a drop, but then after ovulation, I'm kind of back to training as normal. During that time after ovulation, you're seeing estrogen and progesterone starting to increase, hopefully together. And I'm still feeling pretty strong, but I'm also aware that because you've got that influence of progesterone, you are not as anabolic as what you may have been previously. So progesterone, its role in the body is to help break down tissue to get the endometrium lining ready for implantation. So I'm paying a little bit more attention to making sure I'm really getting my protein intake in and around training, because I want to stimulate that anabolic effect as much as I can, knowing that progesterone's kind of having that counteracting effect. And I'm also being aware on how I'm fueling my body, continuing to make sure that I'm fueling with, good carbohydrates in and around training as well. Before I get my period is like that 5-7 days, can sometimes be the time when women start to feel a bit blah. And
Mm,
obviously taking a whole week off training might be something that could end up setting you back. And instead of going with that approach of being like, okay, like tools down for a week, I feel a bit crap. We also know that movement is medicine.
yeah.
And movement does generally help the body reduce inflammation, feel more alert, lower cortisol, all those beautiful effects that exercise has. I may be just a little bit more mindful of, hey, this week might not be the week I'm going to hit a PB. This week might be the week, instead of doing 4 sessions, I might just do 3.
Mm,
And instead of doing like my high intensity work that I would ordinarily feel great to doing, I might opt that out for maybe a recovery run or a recovery walk in the days before I get my period, because I know that the body might not be responding as well as I want it to. And at the end of the day, the training effect is only going to be matched by my ability to recover from it. So if I've had some pretty crappy sleep, or I'm not feeling my best, it might be better just to have a little bit of an extra rest day, or just drop the intensity right back and work on movement quality or technique. So I don't specifically train in and around my cycle, but I'm really mindful with how I'm feeling and how I'm fueling my body to make sure I'm getting the most out of the work I'm putting in.
Yeah, and I love that approach because I think it's really important to understand for everyone listening when we talk about, I talk about cyclical living or cycle syncing. So using exercise and nutrition and lifestyle practices around your cycle. It's really important to understand what's happening from a hormonal level and what your, I guess, where you're most energetic and where you're most able to recover or adapt to stresses and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's tuning back into your body and listening to how you're feeling and how you're experiencing each of those phases of your menstrual cycle. Because just because you're leading up to your period doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't move. And definitely, I still train. I still train on my period sometimes, just depending on how I feel. It might not be the first day or two, if it's a heavier day, but I definitely will still train on my period. So I don't think there should be any hard and fast rules about what we like should and shouldn't do, but it's about being like really mindful of how we're feeling, but also our capacity for, particularly when it comes to exercise, like our capacity for recovery and just some of those other things you spoke about, like, in your luteal phase, you're really making sure you're getting enough protein to like offset that, to give you more of that anabolic response for recovery. Yeah.
And like you've got 7 days in a week. So,
Yeah.
You can easily skip a day and do it the next day. And a lot can change in 24 hours in terms of your energy and recovery as well.
For sure. Yeah. I'd love to also talk about like strength training and exercise in pregnancy and postpartum. And I know there's probably lots and lots of considerations around this, but yeah, just some of the things that we may need to consider to adapt when it comes to strength training routines, whether it be pregnancy or that like recovery period in postpartum.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So pregnancy specifically, I love working with any woman who's pregnant and just being on that journey with them. Obviously, sometimes as coaches, we're the first ones to know someone's pregnant, obviously, after they've told their partner. And so it's a really exciting thing to be honest, and especially for new mums when there's so much unknown and so many questions. So maybe I'll break it down trimester by trimester because it does vary somewhat. So first of all, if you've got no contraindicators, which means like no issues, no red flags, it's perfectly okay to start exercising. If you have been exercising previously, routinely, consistently, keep that up. If you're the sort of person that takes your exercise to the extreme, and I'm talking about like ultra extreme, like ultra marathons, ultra training, lots of high intensity stuff, you might need to just reduce the volume and the intensity slightly. But my main point here is it's okay to start exercising. Some women go, oh, like, oh, damn, I'm pregnant. I really should have fallen into some form of exercise routine, but it's too late to start because, there's a bit of a misconception about, if you're doing it before, you should keep doing it, kind of that mantra.
Yeah.
So start by just starting. But during the first trimester, usually around sort of 8 weeks, when you're pregnant, you might see that fatigue really sets in, and that looks different for every woman. But if you are the sort of person that's used to training a consistent amount, you will notice that fatigue, and you will need to make sure that you're decreasing your volume of your session. So when I talk about volume is maybe you're not doing as many reps, or maybe the whole volume of the session is less. So instead of doing maybe 12 working sets, you might be only doing 6 working sets. The adding in more rest between the sets. So that was me, it's hilarious. I don't know why sometimes you don't tell people, you generally don't openly blurt it out to the world that you're pregnant until you're sort of 13 weeks. But I would be there training in the gym and I would take so long between my sets. I'd be sitting there like yawning, sitting on a bench. But I got a session in, you know what I mean? It took me a while, but I just made sure that I was just taking it nice and easy. I might have dropped down my weights a little bit. But, do what's possible, respect your body and respect your fatigue. Even if you need to take 4 weeks off from the gym, know that the first trimester is generally the hardest because that's when we see HCG hormone coming in and causing, the biggest effect on nausea, vomiting, and fatigue. So just respect that and know that that's not necessarily going to be the pattern for the next few trimesters to come. Unfortunately, I do see women, have a rough first trimester, and then because the habit and routine sort of falls away, they don't get back to training because they kind of think, well, what's the point? And I can 100% tell you, even if you take 4 weeks off, you can still get stronger during your second and third trimester. It's a long time to be pregnant and not move.
For sure. I know, like with mine, with my first pregnancy, I did have nausea and fatigue in the first trimester, but I still trained like, an easy 4 or 5 days a week. But my second pregnancy, oh, so rough, so rough. Some weeks, if I got 3 sessions in, I was like, yes, that was amazing. Like, and there were some weeks where I barely did anything because the nausea was that bad. But then second trimester felt great, jumped straight back in. And yes, it was hard, like motivation wise to get back in, but I felt so much better for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then from a nutrition point of view, women will start to experience changes in maybe what they're craving, their metabolism. You do have an increase in estrogen during pregnancy. So you might find that you are more insulin sensitive, which is why you're craving more carbohydrates. So I think, again, respecting that during pregnancy, there should be healthy weight gain.
Yeah.
And especially if you're sitting in that, 18 to 30% body fat, you will put on body fat during pregnancy. That's the whole point. You're trying to grow a baby that you need to nurture and that, is needing to sustain life off you after you have it. So healthy weight gain is important. And so respecting your hunger. And yes, I could sit here and say, try and make, good food choices. But look, hey, I've been pregnant twice and I had days in first trimester where I sat down and ate a full packet of like rice crackers because like that's just what this body needed. So recognize that your body and your food intake needs to change and adapt. And if you're finding that you're like, okay, this is out of control, and like chat to an expert and get some consultation around how you could be better fueling yourself. And also like carrying around snacks as well. Like sometimes you're feeling that feeling nausea. It's like having a small snack with you is sometimes the best way to feel better. But again, every pregnancy is different, and some women just cannot stand even looking at food. So do what you can, be kind on yourself. From an emotional support perspective for like a coach, this is also usually a time I like to sit members down and say, okay, like we need to stop and like reevaluate goals here and talk about like what is our goal in the next 9-10 months. And then what is our goal after that period? Because sometimes, when you don't look pregnant and sometimes you don't feel pregnant, you can sometimes be there going, okay, I'm just going to like carry on as normal. It's good to stop and go, okay, my main goal during this pregnancy is to have a pain-free pregnancy where I'm able to just keep moving as long as I can, and knowing that that's going to help outcomes for the baby and myself later on. So just a quick evaluation of goals. There is also some misconceptions floating around heart rate. And
okay. Yeah, I get asked, actually, I've had a few people ask about this, and it'd be good to know.
Yeah, so what the current research is saying is that for a woman, it's okay to get your heart rate up, but there are a couple of caveats there. One, you don't want to be getting your heart rate up to max intensities, which is, around that like 85, 95% of your 1RM. That's going to be too high. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with getting your heart rate up where you're feeling breathless, providing that you are well hydrated, because being hydrated means that you've got a sufficient amount of blood plasma that's able to pump blood, circulate blood around the body. And if you're dehydrated, you're going to be putting extra load on your cardiac output to be pumping blood around your body and the baby's body as well, that's when we're going to see that increase in fetal heart rate that might be dangerous. So for most women, when you're training in that early stage of pregnancy, you actually have a fairly good internal regulation to kind of know, I think I'm working a bit too hard here, versus getting your heart rate up and a bit of a sweat on. And if you train regularly, you're going to know what that feeling feels like. So if you are not training regularly, this is probably not something you need to be doing.
Yeah.
Because it's new, maybe just start back with more weight training. But if you're used to getting your heart rate up regularly, providing that you're well hydrated and be really mindful of heat stress. So if you're training on a hot day, it's really important you're paying attention to making sure you're well hydrated before going into those sessions. So I'd probably say a little caveat there is, limiting your session time to around 45 minutes, especially if it's on a warmer day, because you want to be making sure that you're well hydrated, that you're also not having your heart rate up for a too long a period of time as well. But there is actually nothing wrong with you getting your heart rate up, providing that you're taking those precautions. You've got those precautions in mind.
So good to know. And I don't know, you might have wanted to touch on this anyway, but I think the importance of nutrition pre and post training in pregnancy is also really important, just because there is so much glucose that is transferred and nutrients that's transferred across the placenta, and it does require that steady flow of glucose and nutrients. And so just making sure, I suggest not to train fasted when you're pregnant, and making sure that you're always eating pre-training and then post-training for recovery as well.
Yeah, 100%. Look, a lot of these things, for any pregnant woman I'm working with, the main thing is listen to your body, because your body actually is sending you these signals. The thought of training fasted when I was pregnant, I wouldn't even comprehend that. I couldn't do anything fasted. So, listen to your body and listen to the signs and signals that it's actually sending you, and trust your gut. If it's a really hot day out there, 35 degrees, pregnant, what do you think you should do? Yes or yay or nay? And then another factor that a lot of women might experience is constipation in that early first trimester as well. So taking steps to not avoid avoiding constipation as much as you can. Obviously, there's a bit of a hormonal influence in there, but staying well hydrated, fiber-rich diet, and really thinking about how much you're bearing down when you're on the toilet, so elevate your feet. All those little tips that you could probably Google. And I just want to say very quickly, there is no correlation between exercise and miscarriage either, because a lot of women are very nervous. Especially if they're thinking about getting back into training, that they're nervous about, okay, what does that mean? Or if they have been training, or possibly they've had a miscarriage. The really sad reality is miscarriage rates are usually 1 in 6, which is really, really high. And a lot of women, especially if you've struggled to fall pregnant, if you have been seeing a fertility specialist, make sure you chat to them, hear what they have to say, and probably they'd probably be giving you recommendations that, if you've had any procedures done, that you're probably not training in and around those procedures. But there is no correlation between exercise and miscarriage. Exercise only promotes health outcomes for you and the baby.
And just a lot of love to you if you have experienced pregnancy loss or you are on a really challenging fertility journey.
So moving on to second trimester, the main thing is loading issues. And that's when we start to see the belly start to show. We see that starting of that thinning and stretching of the core. And we want to be mindful that we're not bearing down, so putting excessive pressure on the pelvic floor, or doming out, which is where we're seeing an increased pressure through that linea alba, the connective tissue that connects through the front of the belly. And for different women, first pregnancy, you can usually disregard loading issues till later, like end of second trimester, depending on how strong you are and how developed you are in your, training techniques. For a second time mum, like as you just mentioned, you feel all of those pregnancy hormones much sooner. And so your body gets much better at being pregnant. So you start to feel fatigue much faster. You also start to see that laxity and stretching of tissue and inflammation of joints around your pelvis. All those things start to show up a lot sooner in your pregnancy. So you might, as a second time mum, need to start backing off some of the load a little bit earlier than what you did with your first pregnancy. So listen, and every pregnancy is different anyway. So learning strategies to self-check if you are loading properly. It's a very easy one once you've got a belly starting to show. That if you're looking into a mirror and you're doing certain exercises, what you should see is that the belly should get smaller and lift slightly upwards if you have got a really good brace. If you don't have a good brace, you're going to see the belly kind of pressing down. You might also start to experience like some heaviness, but that might be like later on. But just look at your belly, look at the shape it's making. Is it lifting and is it slightly getting smaller as it gathers in? And then from a DR perspective, that ab separation, first of all, 100% of women get DR, but you don't want to be there doing exercises that make it worse and specifically cause it, because the abs do need to stretch. They need to accommodate a growing baby. So they will separate at some point, but you don't want to be at a point where you are putting pressure out the front, because you are increasing your risk of hernia, which might be something that, could need surgery later on and obviously be quite dangerous. So when you are doing exercises, and it could be even just getting up off the couch, getting out of bed, have a look at your belly or put your hand on your belly. And if you're seeing like a little cone and a little like a ridge, that's telling you that you're putting too much pressure on your core. So you need to look for some modifications there. The other way is that once the belly starts to get that like rounded shape, is that if you start to notice a flat spot in your belly, that is a good indication that you've got a little bit of a DR there that could be vulnerable when you're doing certain exercises. And that's what I noticed with my second pregnancy, that my belly in certain positions started to create, like it was round and then it got flat and then it round again. So around where my navel was. So it's just something you need to be really mindful of, and modifying core work around the start of your second trimester. So move away from anything that's flexing the core, like your crunches, your more advanced leg lifts. Toe taps still might be fine, depending on, again, depending on whether it's your first or your second baby. I found that I modified all of my core work a lot sooner with my second baby, and really went back to more bracing, side planks, and Palloff style exercises with second baby, just because the core was ready to stretch, and it was way more vulnerable than the first baby. So it's just something to keep in mind. And then the last two questions I usually get is around running and around supine exercise. So supine exercise meaning like, being this laying down completely on your back. There is an awareness there that when you're laying completely on your back without any movement, the baby may put pressure on your vena cava, which could cut off blood supply to the baby. And the signs and symptoms of that is that you start to feel really breathless, and you know it straight away. Having said that, in the gym, it's very rare you're laying down completely on your back without any movement. Even if you're laying on your back and, say, doing a bridge, you've got movement happening through your hips. If you're laying down completely flat on a bench, you're probably doing something on that bench, like a bench press. So here's the thing. I start to get people coming out of a supine position around that 24, 26 week period. It's not necessarily because of the risk to the vena cava and cutting off blood supply. It's because you've got this huge belly in the way, and getting up and down off a bench and up and down off the floor in a way that doesn't cause doming and pressure out is actually really hard. Once you're on your back when you're pregnant, you're kind of like this like little trapped turtle. And it's really, you have to kind of like roll off to the side. So it gets like super awkward. So I generally say like start elevating your bench as soon as it starts to get uncomfortable with you getting up and down off a bench or off the floor flat. And again, I think for first baby, it was around the 26-week mark. For second baby, I think maybe it was like the 22, 23-week mark. So listen to your body, feel how, look how, like just take notice. And if it feels hard, just change it, get your bench up onto a, your bench up onto a slight incline. And, you know, think about how you're getting up and down off the ground. And then running is another one. Should you run when you're pregnant? So I know there are a lot of people who really love running and it's like the thing they do for mental health. And I kept a little bit of running into my program, you know, in that first trimester and then started to back it off in the second trimester. And that was really because of the pressure it might put on pelvic floor. As the baby starts to grow, it develops weight. And you want to be making sure that like you are looking after your pelvic floor in a way that once the baby actually comes out, you don't need to do extra work in trying to re-strengthen it back up. And if you think about it like a towel with a weight on it, and you've got that towel supported at either corners, and you're bouncing that weight up and down on the towel, that there will be a degree of stretching that will have to happen. And one running perspective, you could increase risk of hurting ligaments and joints because of increased laxity that could be so rolling ankles, and no one wants to have a rolled ankle or a busted knee when they're pregnant. That is absolutely no fun. But I just think like if you can just leave out the running when you're pregnant, knowing that it might mean that you've got less rehabilitation to do on your pelvic floor on the other side. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah. And I think it's just really good to know that there are modifications that we can do and still exercise safely and effectively throughout pregnancy, through those different trimesters, taking into those considerations, and just making those like modifications that are going to mean better recovery, you know, better like injury prevention and all of those things throughout pregnancy.
Yeah. And then third trimester, it's when you're in the fourth quarter. So you've just got a few more weeks to go. And I think this is where mindset comes in because, yeah, as a pregnant woman, all those excuses that you had before when you weren't pregnant, they come in and it's exactly the same. I can't be bothered. I'm tired. I've got no energy. But
What's
the
the
thing is, when you're
point? I feel like
pregnant,
that
what's
one,
the
like
point? Like I'm
yeah,
sick of
what's
doing
the
all these same
point?
exercises. I'm just getting bigger anyway. I think this is where, like, you know, you've got to just remind yourself that you've only got a few more weeks to go. And also that, yeah, like pregnancy is an excuse in itself. And I think it's easy to go, well, I'm pregnant. Oh, well. I think there's a certain degree of self-compassion you need to have to be like, okay, I'm pregnant and I'm getting big and it's getting hard. So I might start to reduce, you know, load or volume or the number of sessions, and I might start to sub in at maybe some more gentler forms of exercise. But it's where you kind of got to go, okay, my goal is to just do 2 sessions a week or whatever it might be, just to get you closer to that end line. Around, you know, that 38, 40 weeks is perfectly fine if you're ready to start going into that cave and getting yourself like ready to go. But yeah, continuing to monitor signs for improper loading, that bulging, heaviness, needing to pee. You know, are you getting pain through your pelvis, like the SI joint at the back, or I'd be starting to incorporate more stretching to really help the pregnant woman move a bit better. So more thoracic rotation, more space, more work to actually get into like lateral ribs because the baby's starting to really consume a lot of space in your abdomen. So you need to start to create space so that you are feeling like you can actually, you know, breathe and move. So lots of mid-back mobility, chest openers, keep checking posture, making sure you're not hanging into your hips, making sure you're not hanging into or locking out your knees. Monitoring for fatigue, which I kind of mentioned before. For some pregnant women, I'll start to, yeah, I guess I start to, I'm not going to say kitten gloves, but like I'll be like, okay, like let's, instead of you walking all around the gym, to do your workout, let's just like base you here, especially when you're at that 36-week mark. Like and especially you've got other kids to run around with. You don't want to be wasting all of your energy in the day to actually just go to the gym. So think about your training sessions, maybe have some of it where you're actually seated or laying, and some of it maybe a quarter standing, quarter seated, quarter laying. So then that way you're not completely like flatlined for the rest of the day. You might start to reduce your barbell work and opt for more free weights because you just don't want to be loading the body so much. And keep monitoring for like pain through pelvis. And if you're getting any pain through your like pubic symphysis area or SI joint pain, do see a specialist, but you could also look at the things that might be exacerbating it. So reducing your single leg work, bringing your legs closer in together, maybe some gentle adductor work, but maybe backing off that completely as well. Or it could be even just doing upper body work, anything that you can do, just like help you get through. And then the last thing is doing like some labor specific stuff, which for me, that's like relaxing the pelvic floor and then doing certain exercises that helps to open up the pelvis so that if you are planning on going into labor and having a vaginal birth, the baby actually has more room to move into the pelvis. And that's just a variety of different techniques that helps to open up the hips and find better balance through all the ligaments and tendons that support the uterus as well.
So good. And I would say as well, just for anyone listening, if you are pregnant, don't wait until you've had an injury or you've got niggles or you've got pain anywhere to see someone. Like I know for me, even with my first pregnancy, I felt confident with my training because I'd been training for years, but then I fell pregnant and I started to lose that little bit of confidence with my body and my ability and what I should and shouldn't be doing. And going to see someone like yourself who has this knowledge and specializes in that area of like exercise around pregnancy and postpartum can be so beneficial just to help you personalized with those modifications for exercise and just anything that you either need to modify or add in to help with injury prevention or whatever stage of pregnancy you're in, or supporting for optimal like labor and delivery outcomes as well. I just think that's really, really helpful.
And I've had clients that have developed like debilitating pubic symphysis pain in their second trimester. And then just by putting them on an altered program that enables us to strengthen their glutes and work their body in a different way, they've been able to completely remove any pain and continue training throughout pregnancy. And that was her second pregnancy. And that was her biggest concern because her first baby, she basically couldn't do any training and exercise. And for an active woman, like that's kind of like my definition of hell. Like I use training and exercises for me time, for stress management. It's such a big part of who I am. And not being able to train can really make you feel quite disconnected from your body. And it's just such a beautiful way to actually bond with your baby as well, because you get to go through this like little process where you're really checking in with like, how you doing, baby? How am I doing? You get to like, really be able to check in and find some time just to sit there with your hand on your belly. I just think training when you're pregnant is just such a beautiful time.
Love it. You touched on as well how our training and modifications can help with labor and delivery outcomes. So things like opening up the pelvis and just supporting lengthening the pelvic floor. Do you want to talk more about that?
I would love to.
And I want to preface this by saying I don't want anyone to feel guilty for or feeling like they haven't done enough either in a current pregnancy or in a past pregnancy. We really just share this information to inspire and motivate you and to share what the research is showing on pregnancy and exercise.
First of all, I mean, there's sort of levels in responding to this question. First of all, outcomes for baby, because for mum, there's nothing more motivating than going, okay, how can I best support the life of my unborn child? And what they actually find is that training in pregnancy actually changes has early epigenetic effects on the metabolic performance of your child. So their metabolism will respond to how you are training. And what they find is that it responds to builds a better response to oxidative stress, better immune response, better sympathetic and autonomic nervous response as well. And it also changes fat deposition as well. So when you are taking, say, a woman who trains throughout pregnancy versus one that doesn't, we say that the one that trains during pregnancies, their child is more likely to have that normal homeostatic response in terms of how their metabolism functions, versus maybe the one that doesn't train. It might be setting them up for the environmental conditions that sets the stage for like future metabolic syndromes later on down the track. So like maybe childhood obesity. So I think that in itself is just so mind-blowing and powerful, that you can actually be changing the genetic coding of the way that your baby is going to be at a cellular, performing at a cellular level. And then, physical activity during pregnancy is associated with a 31% decrease in gestational diabetes, which is obviously fairly significant. It also reduces aches and pains. And yeah, there's nothing worse than being 10 months with being pregnant and not being able to move. So the postural changes and some of those symptoms that might come along with what you think are fairly innocuous, like lifestyle things like walking can actually be quite problematic for some women. So going into the gym and doing exercises that aren't super, super repetitive, you can be getting your body stronger without necessarily exacerbating maybe some of the symptoms that you might be experiencing from walking. So for example, like if I picked up any sort of pace when I was walking when I was pregnant, my whole abdomen would just like go into a spasm. Yet I could walk around the gym and train and do a gym session and feel absolutely fine. So training in a gym scenario can be a really great way to be making sure that your body is strong enough to basically carry a baby for 9-10 months. And then when it comes to labor itself, you're training for the biggest physical event of possibly your life. It's a massive endurance event and resilience.
Like a marathon.
Yeah, it is, depending on how long you are actually in labor for. So, and look, there's so many similarities with labor and exercise. Like, typical set might take you a minute. A labor contraction might also be a minute. So just developing that mental grit of being like, I can do this hard set, knowing that when the set is over, I can take a rest and I know the pain will go. And that is very similar to normal labor contractions. And I'll just quickly say normal in terms of not medically induced or possibly having a baby that's presenting posterior, where you might see changes in like that predictable rhythm of the way that the contraction should build, in terms of they should get close together and they get more intense as you get closer to actually delivering. But so many amazing benefits that you can get there. And then obviously exercise in itself is, just such a good endorphin release.
Oh, that's been so helpful. Like so much wisdom when it comes to training around our cycles, training through pregnancy, through each of those trimesters, and then setting up for like optimal labor and birth outcomes. Now, I know we're running out of time and I'd love to have you back on the podcast because there's so much more we can chat about when it comes to exercise for women in general. And I know you are also doing a lot of work at the moment around the like perimenopause and menopause phase and helping women with exercise through that. So do you want to share what you've got coming up? I know you've got a course coming up when it comes to exercise and perimenopause. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the 1st of April, we've got a 5-part Power Up course, which is specifically designed to support women who are approaching perimenopause or menopause. And so that course is a free course. It's going to be delivered in a 5 sort of video series broken up so that you can very easily digest the information. Lots of practical tips. And I'm going to be, mostly focusing on the training element as well as nutrition, but deep diving into the symptoms and the symptoms of what women might be experiencing, some of the problematic symptoms that the women might be experiencing, and how you can be developing our strategies to move through that phase, to really protect, muscle mass, bone health, your metabolism, and just really be feeling like your fittest, strongest self. So that's super exciting. That's a new course. And as I said, that's going to be coming out on the 1st of April. And then we've got lots of options in terms of, if women are local to Preston and they're looking for a great community to train in, we do have an awesome intro offer of 5 sessions for $50. So definitely look us up, get in touch, and we'll get you down for a trial. And I do train a handful of women online as well. So if you do live too far away from 23W, we do have the option where we can train you online. It's all bespoke programming based on exactly what you need, and you get fortnightly calls from me as well, just to be making sure that you're on track to hit your goals and that you feel really supported and able to learn and grow along the way. So that's open to women of all ages.
So good. And so share with us, where can we find you? Where's your website, socials?
Yeah, so you can find us on @23W on Instagram. You can find me on @Ange bottom. What is the bottom slash?
I don't know what to call it.
The slash that sits on the bottom, right? On Instagram. And you can head over to our website, 23w.com.au. It is about to get a facelift. So if you look at it now, it's getting a little sad, but it's about to get a real sexy little revamp. So make sure you definitely head over there and check that out.
So good. Thank you so much, Ange. I really appreciate you sharing all of that. And we'll definitely have you back on the podcast. And maybe next on socials, I might share some questions that the audience can ask.
I love that.
Answer for next episode as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many things. I could talk on this space forever, really.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks for joining us on the Empowered Flow podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd love you to share it with a friend and take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support means the world and fuels our mission to empower women everywhere. You can also reach out to me on Instagram @TrisAlexandraNutrition. Sending big love. I'll catch you in the next episode.